various cuts, and you've heard all about, painful cuts, promises, harsh and short-sighted. We'll quote from some of that. Turns out that in almost every case, they increased them, even though there was all the hue and cry about cutting the budget. So we'll get into that. A piece by Ann Coulter on contract with Republicans, and then we'll get into some practical things a little bit later about families need to unplug from screen time and get some face time. But a lot of the events that have transpired over the last 24 hours make it, I think, important for us to talk about immigration for a few minutes. And so if you'd like to join us on this, we will cover this. And then if you have some questions, we'll continue on or else move on to some other topics. But yesterday, President Trump decided to actually give his support to a bill that you probably did not hear about until yesterday. And unless you were watching the press conference later on, you may not know about it still. It's called the RAISE Act, and it's an attempt to really reform the legal immigration system in America. If you've heard me speak on immigration, you know that I say two things. Number one, sometimes we make legal immigration too hard, and we make illegal immigration too easy. Now, I don't mean that it's really easy to cross a desert and be taken by coyotes and all the other things that are happening in order to people to get here, or to stow away on a ship and then claim refugee status or whatever. But I am saying that in some respects, if you can get here, sometimes that's enough to at least guarantee the possibility of a pathway to citizenship. But I want to focus on the other. We're going to set aside illegal immigration for just a minute and talk about the other issue, and that is legal immigration. And the RAISE Act is actually co-sponsored by Senators Tom Cotton from Arkansas and Senator David Perdue from Georgia. Now, what this would do is, in a sense, roll back the clock. You have to understand what happened in 1965. And in 1965, due in large part to the push of Ted Kennedy and others, the Immigration and Naturalization Act of 1965 moved away from what was kind of called a quota system, in which there was really a focus on trying to bring people here, giving them various quotas based upon nationality. And it was sort of like a merit-based system. But you can imagine in the 1960s why there was a move away from this. We were in the midst of the civil rights movement. Even talking about a quota for Italians or Portuguese or Greeks or Polish or whatever just seemed irrational. It seemed discriminatory. And so this particular policy did away with the quota system, but also kind of the merit-based system. And the attempt on the part of this legislation is to return to something that would be a little bit more merit-based. Now, what do we mean by that? Well, it means that if indeed you come with, say, a PhD in biochemistry, you might get a few more points than an individual that maybe has a high school education. If you already can speak English, have all the possibilities of assimilating to the American culture, that works a lot better than whether you're from a third world country and don't have opportunities to learn the language, learn the culture, develop some kind of skills that would be helpful in this country. Now, as you might imagine, this was controversial. I'm going to get to that in just a minute, because the interchange between the White House senior advisor, Stephen Miller, and CNN's Jim Acosta got to be pretty significant. But nevertheless, this would be an attempt to, first of all, to reduce legal immigration, not immediately, but in the long term, down maybe by 50%. Then as a result, because current levels of immigration, by the way, are at historic highs. Number two, the one thing that also caused such controversy was that individuals who could speak English would be given, obviously, a priority. Now, as we'll talk about in just a minute, the back and forth that took place in the news conference had to do with the fact that Stephen Miller reminds everyone that in order to become a naturalized citizen, you have to speak English. And frankly, even before you come here, to be even functional, you'd have to have some familiarity with the language. Otherwise, your ability to succeed is going to be significantly hampered. And so as a result, that is the issue that was being brought front and center. And then this idea of the merit-based idea in the first place was kind of interesting, because according to a recent article, Quote from Politico, those admitted to the U.S. on the basis of merit have accounted for less than 10% of all legal immigrants over the past 15 years. So we're not even coming close to using any kind of merit-based system. And so this is what the president said. He said this competitive process will favor applicants who can speak English, financially support themselves and their families, and demonstrate skills that will contribute to our economy. The RAISE Act prevents new immigrants from collecting welfare and protects U.S. workers from being displaced. And the point that Stephen Miller was making in the press conference was simply that this is not just something that would benefit Americans at the top scale, but even at the bottom scale, because indeed you have a situation where, first of all, a very high percentage of those who come here without those skills sooner or later end up on welfare. And second of all, because they come here, they compete for the jobs that prevent some of the other individuals on the lower income scale from being somewhat successful. Well, you can imagine by the time there was a press conference, they sent in White House senior advisor Stephen Miller, who's a very bright individual, and immediately CNN's Jim Acosta, who came, I think his family is originally from Cuba, I think his father came here from Cuba, said what the president is proposing here does not sound like it's in keeping with American tradition when it comes to immigration. Instead, Jim Acosta said, the Statue of Liberty says, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. Well, those are fighting words, because anytime you mention the Statue of Liberty, you know what's coming next. Because that's when Stephen Miller came back and said, I don't want to get off the whole thing here about history, but the Statue of Liberty is a symbol of liberty and lighting the world. It's a symbol of American liberty lighting the world. The poem that you're referring to was added later and is not actually part of the original Statue of Liberty. Where at that point, Jim Acosta accused him of some kind of national park revisionism. But even the article I have in my hands right here by Kyle Swenson reminds us that Stephen Miller is right. The poem is called New Colossus. It was not part of the original statue built by the French and given to the American people to celebrate America's centennial. The poem comes from a poet by the name of Emma Lazarus, who actually composed the poem in 1883 as part of a fundraising effort to build the statue's base. But I think, in that press conference and in some of the reaction to President Trump's idea of supporting what has been put forward by Senators Tom Cotton and David Perdue, illustrate the incredible divide that we have right now. So when we come back, let me open up the phones. We don't usually open up this early, but I'm going to move on to some other topics later, and perhaps you already have some thoughts. Maybe you've heard about this. Is it time to begin to reduce legal immigration? Is it time to ask those individuals that come here to speak English? And should we have a merit system that brings in the best and the brightest to help us here in this country? What are your thoughts? 1-800-351-1212. Immigration on the Table. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, Cal Thomas begins his column by recounting his visit to Singapore a few years ago. He asked the cab driver about the unemployment rate. He was shocked to hear that it was fewer than 2%. What was the reason for such a low rate? Well, the cab driver said, we don't have any welfare here. If you are able-bodied and don't work, the government doesn't send you a check. The Apostle Paul writes in 2 Thessalonians 3:10 that if anyone would not work, neither should he eat. He recognized what the leaders in Singapore discovered. We need to be motivated to work. Regularly giving someone a handout can be a great demotivator. Handouts rob people of their dignity and ultimately devalue their work ethic. Welfare programs have been around for decades, but they seem to be increasing in number and expense. There are at least 126 different programs at an annual cost of $1 trillion per year. Certainly, many of the recipients have a financial need, but we need to evaluate whether a whole generation living on welfare is good for the families and good for the nation. Few Americans would deny the value of giving someone a hand up by providing temporary assistance so that they can get back on their feet. But providing decades of handouts creates dependency and corrodes the human spirit. Humans were made to work and express their energy and creativity in their work. Laziness and idleness are usually the byproduct of many welfare programs. We've also made welfare very attractive. In previous commentaries, I described studies that concluded that welfare pays more than a minimum wage job in 35 states. In more than a dozen states, welfare pays more than $15 per hour. People on welfare may not be lazy, but they aren't stupid. Why work when welfare pays so well? Perhaps that is why the unemployment rate in Singapore is lower than in the United States. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, let's spend a little bit of time talking again about immigration. We'll move on to some other topics. If you'd like to join us today, 1-800-351-1212. You perhaps have not heard about the RAISE Act, and again, it's an acronym that stands for something, but basically has to do with the issue of immigration. It has been co-sponsored by Senators Tom Cotton from Arkansas and David Perdue from Georgia. You probably have not heard about it, and that's one of the reasons why Donald Trump decided to feature it. The reality is it hasn't collected a whole lot of other co-sponsors, so the chances of it passing right up there with slim to none. But at the same time, it's certainly the prerogative of the president or anyone else, if they want, to feature a piece of legislation that you think might have an impact, a positive impact. And so this particular one would, again, favor those individuals who have certain kinds of skills. And this is an attempt to return to some aspects of what was our immigration and naturalization policy from about the 1920s to 1965. In 1965, this changed, and I understand why it changed, because the way in which the quota system worked at the time, it tended to favor maybe individuals more from the northern European countries, and then sort of discriminate against people that were Greek or Italian or something of that nature, sometimes even Polish. And so this just seemed backward and discriminatory, and so it was eliminated. Got that. Why that took place back in 1965. But what has happened now, as I pointed out just a minute ago, if you look at the latest articles that have come out, only about 10% of the individuals that come here legally actually came here on any kind of merit basis. So this is an attempt to maybe move it back in that direction. That's the first issue. That's controversial enough, I think, for some individuals that are convinced that we should open our borders to anybody that wants to come in for any reason at any time. Those are known as the open borders individuals. But then there was a second issue that certainly seemed to surface in the back and forth that took place just the other day between the White House senior advisor Stephen Miller and CNN's reporter Jim Acosta. And that is where Jim Acosta simply said, are we only going to allow immigrants from Great Britain and Australia in? And I appreciate, again, the response that came from Stephen Miller, that that's incredibly naive and probably even somewhat biased. Yes, people that live in Scotland or Ireland or Great Britain or in Australia, yes, they speak English. If you've traveled anywhere around the world, you know that a lot of other people speak English. For example, when I go to the Philippines and speak at Word of Life, one of the things that they work very hard in doing is making sure that young people know how to speak English. Now, they may have grown up learning Tagalog, but they work real hard to speak English because it is kind of the language of the internet. If you can't speak English, you better speak Chinese, because otherwise you are really going to be left off of the internet, and that is certainly going to affect you. When I go to Hungary, and I'll be there again next January, the classes are taught both in Hungarian and in English. I, of course, speak in English, and they do the translation for Hungarian, but usually by the time I get there, most of the Hungarian students know enough English that they already so know what I've said even after I've spoken. They may dutifully listen to the Hungarian just to see if they've missed something. But again, they recognize that in Europe, if you can't speak something other than your native language, and especially if you're in a place like Romania or Hungary or places like that, you better be able to speak something, German or preferably English. This is not a deal breaker the way it was actually presented, and yet this is, of course, one of the other elements of that as well. Let me, again, if you'd like to join our conversation, take some phone calls, 1-800-351-1212. But again, President Trump put it this way. He said this competitive process will favor immigrants and applicants who can speak English, financially support themselves and their families, and demonstrate skills that will contribute to our economy. The RAISE Act prevents new immigrants from collecting welfare and protects U.S. workers from being displaced. He goes on to say that the legislation will restore the sacred bonds of trust between America and its citizens. This legislation demonstrates our compassion for struggling American families who deserve an immigration system that puts their needs first and puts America first. So that was just a little bit of a dust-up that took place yesterday. And if you had not had a chance to see that, you will probably see some more of that in the nightly news. And, of course, if you'd like to join us on that topic, 1-800-351-1212. Let's get to a couple of the stories I wanted to cover today. And that is, so often we find that because there is such a focus on the narrative, and right now the narratives usually are Russian collusion or dysfunction in the White House, that a lot of really important things that affect you and your family just never seem to get covered. And so that's why I posted this particular article by John Stossel. It's entitled The Trump Budget. He says, remember President Trump's terrible budgets and the budget cuts? He talks about one of the headlines for New York Times, promises little but pain. The Washington Post headline, harsh and short-sighted. So then he says Congress passed a budget. President Trump signed it. Did you notice the pain? Of course, the answer is no. And he says, I follow the news closely, but until I researched this column, John Stossel said, I did not know that Congress actually raised spending on the very agencies that President Trump wanted to cut. Let's just give you a few examples. And again, if you'd like to use these in a letter to the editor, a letter to your member of Congress, maybe post this on your Facebook page, you will see that what we have sort of behind the scenes is more important than what we actually see reported in the mainstream media. For example, President Trump and his administration called for a $4.7 billion cut to the Agriculture Department. Congress instead increased the department's appropriation by $12.8 billion. Whew. He also called for a $15 billion cut to Health and Human Services. Congress instead gave them $2.8 billion more than they asked for. The Trump administration wanted a $6.2 billion cut to housing and urban development. Congress gave HUD a $500 million increase. And again, the Trump administration and President Trump wanted the Commerce Department's budget cut by $1.4 billion, and Congress made no cut. And so he goes on to give you the sense that this is something that we simply never hear about. He says, again, question that John Stossel asks is, why wasn't this news? Because in Washington and in the media's eyes, spending increases are expected. The cuts are always terrible. America continues on its road to bankruptcy. And he said, what will those departments do with those budget increases? And I'll just give you a couple of examples before we take a break. For example, the Agriculture Department says its mission is to promote agriculture production that better nourishes Americans. But the reality is, as he points out, that because of the free market, agricultural entrepreneurs provide plenty of food. Fruit and vegetable farmers rarely get subsidies, but there are ample subsidies of fruit and vegetables. He said we don't need the agriculture department any more than we need a Hollywood movie department or an iPhone department. Most of what the department does is corporate welfare. America's richest corn and grain farmers collect most of the money. Politicians eagerly give the money to people who visit their offices and pour out tales of need. Corn and grain farmers visit and whine because they have millions of dollars at stake. We don't visit because each subsidy costs us just a few bucks. So the corporate welfare continues. He goes on and picks out another one. And before the end of the program here, let's take at least one more. Commerce Department. Commerce's biggest program is NOAA. That's the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which actually pushes climate change alarmism. And they've actually produced PSAs that warn that the Arctic ice is thinning at an alarming rate. But then again, it isn't just that. The other day, NOAA and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration actually went out and bought a yacht for $300,000, and they're using it to go fishing. And again, the department says what they do is critical. They fund centers in every state. They consult with companies facing technological problems. And I love John Stossel's comment, government good at fixing technical problems? News to me. So again, sleep well, America. Even though we've been told that the Trump budget was painful, it was harsh, it was short-sighted, it was going to hurt the poor, nothing of the sort took place because most of these major budget items were not only not cut, they were increased radically in the other direction. So again, if you'd like to join our conversation, put two issues on the table. One, immigration. The other, the way in which Congress these days has been spending your money. Come back, we'll talk about a couple of other articles we've posted today, and if you'd like to read those in their entirety or use those for letters that you might write to your member of Congress or to your newspaper or post on your Facebook page, they're all available at the website pointofview.net. If you'd like to join our conversation, let's open up the phones, 1-800-351-1212. We'll take some calls right after this.
If you've listened for any length of time, you've probably heard about Point of View listeners who've done amazing things, started ministries, found their life's calling, impacted their city, their state, the nation. But let me be clear, you don't have to have a huge impact to be faithful. I thought about that when I read a note from Joanne in Texas. She admitted, up until recently, I've not had much of a political view, nor have I ever been so informed. But since I signed up for your email and website information, I can now get the correct information that the public is oblivious to. Joanne ended by thanking us for the Take Action section of our website, where we make it easy for you to express your views on key issues with your elected representatives. Everything we do on the air, online, through mail and email is made possible through people like you who invest in Point of View so we can invest in issues that matter. Take your place on the Truth Team. Call 1-800-347-5151 or sign up online at pointofview.net/team. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Kind of an open line. We're looking at different priorities. The first was the issue of immigration priorities. And I might just mention that this, which would favor those who speak English, would not discount those who did not speak English, but it would give priority to individuals that are already ready to assimilate in this country. And when you talk about a merit-based system, as you listen to the news or you read the newspapers or you watch television tonight, remember something that probably is not going to be mentioned. First of all, that this merit-based system is something that is used in places like Canada and Australia. So it's not like the United States is some kind of outlier. It's an attempt to, in some respects, return to some of the kinds of principles that were used from about 1920 to 1965, but without kind of the discriminatory aspect that caused for that revision. And the other thing to remember, as we've pointed out just a few minutes ago, and I'm probably going to write a whole commentary on this, if you look over the last 15 years of legal immigrants, and again, we're talking about legal immigration at the moment, not illegal immigration. Those people who came here, they played by the rules, they filled out all the forms, they came here, and then eventually, of course, also became naturalized. Over the last 15 years, less than 10% of those legal immigrants came here on the basis of a merit system. So obviously, we've gone from a time where we had kind of a 100% merit-based system on a quota, and I think the quotas might have been problematic. Of course, they were. That's one of the reasons they changed the law in 1965. But we went from where it was 100% to less than 10% now. You obviously see that there's a need for some kind of balance, and as soon as you start calling for that balance, then you have people claiming that this is violating the very spirit of the Statue of Liberty. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. Of course, that's not part of the Statue of Liberty. The Statue of Liberty is a statue not of immigration. It's the statue of what? Liberty. This was added, as I mentioned later on, as a poem by Emma Lazarus. But nevertheless, we talked a little bit about the immigration priorities. Just a minute ago, I talked about, if you will, the budget priorities that seem out of whack. In just a minute, I want to get into what I think should be some of the tax reform priorities. But I've also posted a piece by Ann Coulter, which is entitled The Contract with Republicans, because she reminds us back in 1994, after 40 years in the wilderness, Republicans swept both houses of Congress running on Newt Gingrich's contract with America. This is where the Republicans promised to hold votes on 10 popular policy ideals, and they did so. Some were enacted, others were not, and that was very helpful. Now she says we sort of almost need a contract with Republicans to get them to do what we've asked them to do, because after all, the country gave the Republican Party the House in 2010. Republicans then got the Senate in 2014, and then they got the presidency in 2016. And she says we're not seeing any difference. So before I take a phone call or two, let me just mention her 3 contract terms, if you will. The first is build the wall. She said people said chant build the wall were merely a shorthand for a whole slew of immigration policies unified by a single idea of putting Americans' interest, if not first, at least above the interest of complete strangers to whom we owe absolutely nothing. And so the point she's making is build the wall means more than just build the wall. But you know what? She points out something I've never really said on the air, sort of obvious, but sometimes you need to say the obvious. And that is the wall might be the only part of the Trump administration's immigration reforms that would not instantly be reversed in the future by another president, you know, a future Barack Obama, or even, she said, George W. Bush. Allowing Border Patrol agents to do their job is a policy that lasts only as long as he is president, but a wall is forever. So that's the first point. Second one, Supreme Court. She says this is, again, as we listen to these kinds of things, why President Trump must appoint and Senate must confirm, and I love her line here, brilliant conservative judges, preferably in their 30s with good EKGs so that they can keep issuing opinions well into their 1990s, and to make sure that they're sufficiently vetted so that we don't get any David Souters or Harriet Myers. And so that's another issue as well. And then finally, number 3, she says, stop wasting money and precious lives on pointless wars. She says, every recent war has been counterproductive at best. At worst, they have been meat grinders for our bravest young men. Imagine that some portion of the trillions of dollars poured into these endless and ongoing war in Afghanistan has been used to build a soccer seat stadium in Baghdad, and then imagine we build 100 more just like it right next to one another. The point she's making is we're spending a lot of money and time and treasure and blood that aren't really generating what we really need. So if nothing else, it is time to see if we can reestablish some of our priorities. So we talked about immigration priorities, budget priorities, as well as just, if you will, public policy priorities. And if we have some time, we'll get into some of the tax reform priorities. But let's take some phone calls. Todd in Louisiana, WPAE. Thank you for joining us today.
Hey, Kirby. Thanks for taking my call.
What's on your mind?
My comment is that we let immigration, well, actually illegal immigration, get way out of hand. And we didn't protect our borders. We just let them flood all in. Now, I think we opened up a can of worms, Kirby, and now we can't put a cap on it. And one other thing, Kirby, and as far as entitlements go, that has also got way out of hand. You know, welfare has become, outstandingly unmanageable. And now, like I said, you're not gonna fix this problem, Kirby, because you're gonna cause a civil war. Because now people really are too, I could say, getting used to the entitlement forms. And I'm going to hang up and listen to you, brother. Thank you.
First of all, you make a good point, and I might just mention that my commentary today is entitled Welfare and Human Nature. I'll come back to the immigration part in just a minute, but I started by quoting from a friend of ours, Cal Thomas, who actually talked about when he went to Singapore a couple of years ago. He asked the cab driver about the unemployment rate and was shocked to hear that it was less than 2%. What was the reason, he asked, for the low rate? Well, we don't have any welfare here, the cab driver responded. If you're able-bodied and don't work, the government doesn't send you a check. And if that seems harsh, well, take it up with the Apostle Paul, because in 2 Thessalonians 3:10, he said, if any would not work, neither should they eat. He recognized what the leaders, I think, in Singapore discovered, and that is sometimes people need to be motivated to work. And as you've pointed out, Todd, only so well, there is the benefit to those who are progressive in entitlements, because once you receive them, they're virtually impossible to remove. So that is certainly one issue. Of course, you've been talking about illegal immigration. Let's be clear that what was discussed yesterday, both by President Trump and then later in that kind of counterpoint that took place in the press room between Stephen Miller and Jim Acosta, is one that actually addresses the whole issue of legal immigration. But again, it is going to be difficult, if not impossible, to reverse some of that unless the American people stand up. And I do see a correlation between my immigration statements and my statements that came from John Stossel, because John Stossel points out the same thing. Until we start having the American people say, wait a minute, why are you spending so much money on this department or that department? Why aren't you reforming entitlements? Why are you just allowing the budget to go up every single year? And if you're looking for blame, there's enough to go around. I've posted on our website in the past, and I've posted again if you'd like to see it, the amount of spending that takes place every single year when adjusted for inflation. And it almost doesn't make any difference whether you have a Republican president or a Democratic president in office, or a Republican Congress or a Democratic Congress. Now, to be fair, some of those individuals tend to spend more than others, but the amount that is spent each year by the federal government increases every single year. And after all the hue and cry and the headlines talking about promises, little but pain, harsh and short-sighted, how we're hurting the poor, the reality is the budget went up. And the same kind of things in terms of immigration. As more and more people have come here and they want comprehensive immigration reform, they don't want to talk about this particular aspect of trying to make our legal immigration a little bit more effective and more streamlined and they certainly oftentimes want to turn a blind eye to illegal immigration. And as I think you've pointed out only so well, Todd, we have individuals that have come to expect and depend upon that. And this has been one of the problems that I talk about in my commentary today. We have approximately 126 different federal programs for welfare at an annual cost of $1 trillion. Are there better ways to go? There certainly are, but first of all, we have, as a country, have to say we can't keep spending like this, and we can't have more and more people in dependency. People hate this illustration, but it's a good one. When you have so many people riding in the wagon and very few people pulling the wagon, eventually the wagon doesn't move. We'll be right back.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Evelyn Shatkin, Linda Shiflett, and Doug Maples took prayer seriously. So seriously, in fact, that they decided to meet together after work and pray for a colleague that had been causing them problems. They met at the cubicle of their colleague after work on a day that she was not even in the office. Their prayer got pretty serious. They anointed the cubicle with oil, according to Shatkin's religious tradition. They prayed for peace and joy for their colleague. They even commanded demons to leave their colleague as they prayed. Word got back to the supervisors about the after-hours prayer meeting, and after an investigation, the supervisor concluded that, quote, the nature, the manner that they're praying, what language they're using, determines whether the prayer was harassment. Human Resources agreed and notified the prayer givers that they would be terminated for their harassing prayers. Shatkin and Shiflett asked for a religious accommodation for the prayers, but that was denied. They were fired. First Liberty Institute took up their case. A federal district court sided with the employees as it concluded, quote, can a prayer for someone constitute harassment when the alleged object of the prayer is unaware of it? This court suspects not, unquote. In fact, the court concluded that the college's own policies protected the prayers of these employees. Firing someone for their peaceful exercise of religion at work doesn't have a prayer. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let me just mention that in the second hour, we're going to play, first of all, an interview I did with Mike Sharrow, who is the president and CEO of the C12 Group, and then Tom O'Dwyer will be in studio with us to answer some of the questions and give us some more perspective. And this is just a great outreach to those of you that are in the area of business and want to apply your Christian views. So we'll get into that in just a minute. But let's see if we can take some phone calls here. We'll go to Ken in Birmingham, Alabama. Ken, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Good afternoon, Kirby. Just wanted to make a real quick comment about speaking English. I find it real interesting that a private pilot friend of mine told me a few years ago, and I just did a Google search that seems to confirm that if you are an airline pilot and fly into any country anywhere in the world and speak to the control tower in English, they have to answer you back in English. It is the universal language of air traffic control.
Yes, well, there's a good example of that as well. I'm not saying English just because I speak English and that's my first language. I do say that it's the language of the Internet. It's the language of air traffic control. It's the language in many places in the world of commerce. And so to say that an individual who wants to come to this country and be a citizen in this country should learn English is not a very high bar. It's not a demand that is discriminatory, yet you would think so if you would listen to some of the reaction to some of the proposals being put forward right now by Senators Cotton and Perdue. So, again, I appreciate you bringing that up.
Thank you, sir. Bye-bye.
Oh, thank you for bringing that up. Just another very important issue as well. We'll get to another phone call in just a minute, but I also talked about some of the priorities, not only in terms of immigration and the budget, but the other day we also talked about some of these tax proposals. It's going to be an ongoing debate and discussion about tax reform, and it seems to me that that should, first of all, focus on cuts that are going to be immediate, because after all, businesses are going to be thinking about whether or not they're going to get further benefit in the future, and they need to be permanent because businesses invest with a long tail. So it seems to me that there are just some really important principles that need to be applied, and this is another conversation we might have next week. We're going to be giving you some action items, especially on these nominations, but we'll be pretty soon, as Congress really is gearing up for the fall, giving you an opportunity to contact your 2 United States senators or your member of Congress about some of these important issues. So I hope you'll go to our website every day. And of course, I hope you'll listen to Point of View every single day. Let's go back to the phones. We'll go to Atlanta, Georgia. Tim, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
This is Ken.
Oh, Ken. Okay, sorry, I messed up.
Yeah, I saw a real interesting documentary that was pretty well researched on Georgia Public Television, PBS, I think it was the World Channel, on how they were trying to deal with the flow of immigration at Ellis Island before, during, and after World War II. And at that time, it was a meritocracy, similar to what you were describing, based on merit.
Sure.
And they wanted people to come in who were fit to work, and they wanted to find. Actually, they were looking for ways to find reasons to find flaws with people. And they started inventing words like moron and imbecile, and they brought in psychiatrists and they were splitting up families, sometimes leaving one of the children, deporting one of the children, a sister, and the rest of the family can come in, but, one sister can't answer the questionnaire or took offense at the word, and so they end up deporting one family member. This is what they did in the 1940s. They were checking people for diseases, and, they had a hospital on Ellis Island and all of that. And it was a meritocracy that was, the reason behind what they were doing. So, I mean, I'm all for, people speaking English and the legal thing, but I'm also for the compassion and there's a scripture in Leviticus chapter 19, verse 33, and it says, in 34, it says, and if a stranger sojourn with thee in your land, you shall not vex him, but the stranger that dwelleth with you shall be unto you as one born among you, and thou shalt love him as thyself, for ye were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God.
Well, and again, one of the things I would say is I'd be real careful about trying to take an Old Testament passage and apply it in the New Testament because, for example, if you were a stranger, you did not have the full rights as a Jew, whereas we say that if you are a stranger in this land, in other words, you are a legal immigrant, you'll eventually be a naturalized citizen and you would have all the rights and privileges as a true born American. So, again, we have to recognize that there is a principle of compassion, and certainly in the Old Testament, even in the New Testament, we have arguments that we need to be outreaching and compassionate to those who are less fortunate. That certainly is the case. At the same time, we also, in Romans 13, have the responsibility of government to guard our borders, to protect us, because government does not bear the sword for nothing. And so certainly protecting us from foreign invaders is one aspect. That's the military. We call it today the Defense Department. And then there's the other part, which has to do with protecting us and bringing in the right people, making sure that our borders are secure, and that's the Department of Homeland Security. So we have to balance those two. And again, this, as we are talking about at the moment, is the issue of legal immigration. And I don't think, as I said before, that this RAISE Act is going to go very far, but we'll see. President Trump highlighted it to start a discussion, and it's a discussion worth taking. How many individuals do we want to bring into this country? Oftentimes when we have these discussions about immigration, I ask people, well, how many people would you like to bring into this country? And surprisingly, most people are not aware of the fact that we bring in 1 million people every year legally into this country. And this one would reduce that, but also base some of that on merit. So those are just a couple of issues to put on the table. And of course, as Ken points out, there is a history in the past when you go back to a bias that some people had about different individuals from different ethnic backgrounds, or the quota system that may have been abused or misused. Nobody's talking about doing that, but they are simply saying that right now, in the last 15 years, only about 10%, actually a little bit less than 10% of all the people that have come here in this country and have been admitted here legally have been admitted on the basis of merit. And if you think about what that means, it also might mean that other people that you would prefer to have in this country, computer programmers, individuals that have background in microbiology or biochemistry or a variety of other things, are still sitting in those countries waiting someday to come to this country. And if you've ever heard this program before, you know that we have heard from many people telling us incredible stories of how hard it was for them to come from England to the United States, from South Africa to the United States, from Canada to the United States, from Germany to the United States, because of the difficulties of our legal immigration system. So this will be a topic we'll probably discuss again tomorrow. But let's, if we can, take a break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the C12 Group. It's an organization you need to know about, and if you are an owner of a business, or no doubt in your church you know people that own a business that would really like to apply biblical principles to their area of work, I think you really want to pay attention to this conversation we're going to have this hour. I'm going to play an interview I did with Mike Sharrow, who is the president and CEO of the C12 Group. He is actually in another part of the country, but came here. We taped that interview, and then we're going to have Tom O'Dwyer, managing chair of the C12 Group in Dallas, to help answer some questions you might have. And if you'd like to join us then, again, we'll open up the phones, 1-800-351-1212. If you'd like to read a few of the articles we've posted on the website today, they're all available at the website, pointofview.net. As you go there, if you can click on the button that says donate, we are in the summer months more dependent than ever on your financial support. So if you can help us out, we would greatly appreciate it. Let's take a break. We'll find out more about the C12 Group. All that coming up right after this.
I'm sure you've heard the definition of insanity: to keep on doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result. Right now, I want to talk to someone who has listened to Point of View for a long time. Is that you? Have you been listening somewhat regularly for months, maybe even years? All right, good. When was the last time that you made the effort, the sacrifice, to invest in the work of Kerby and Point of View? If you're concerned about the direction of the nation, something needs to change. Point of View wants to expand its reach, to add to the number of stations airing the program, to change more lives that will change the nation. But that won't happen if you keep listening, but don't give back. Please, now is the time. Step up. Give online at pointofview.net or using the Point of View radio app. Or call 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or again, visit pointofview.net, click on Become a Monthly Partner, and you be the change that America desperately needs. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kirby Anderson.
Second hour today, we're going to spend some time talking about the C12 Group. And you may say, well, I don't know much about it. That's exactly why we're doing this particular interview. A while back, I had a chance to do an interview with Mike Sharrow. We taped it, and we have in studio with us today Tom Adwar. We'll be talking with him in just a minute. He is the president and CEO of the C12 Group and has had a variety of leadership roles, including church functions as well as corporate settings. And because of that, I began the interview by just talking about how he has been so gifted to do this particular ministry of C12.
You know, it's one of those things, oftentimes when you're following God, only in retrospect you begin to understand how come it makes so much sense.
Yeah.
So I grew up in Alaska, first kid to go to college in my family, really wasn't sure where life would take me. Fell in love with Jesus, and at one point just assumed I'd be on a track to full-time ministry. And so I went to school for that and was just sold out for that. I was poor, so I needed to get a job, so I started working in business, and I enjoyed it. And I began wrestling there with, what does my faith mean at work? And I was a good Christian guy, but that's really where I began to realize the sacred-secular divide had kind of crept into my life, where I was moral at work, but ministry was evenings and weekends. And one night God said, you know, it's more than that. And I began to go down a journey of wrestling through faith at work. And that's that really set me on the course to C12 years later.
Yes, and one of the things we've talked about on this program before with various guests is this kind of sacred secular divide that says, well, my Christianity relates to my family and my church life. Maybe occasionally it relates to my business life, but not a whole lot. And what you want to do at C12 Group and others is to break that down and recognize that business can be ministry, that every area of your life really needs to come under the lordship of Christ.
Yeah, we like to say, if you look through the Gospels, it doesn't seem like Jesus ever recruited a part-time disciple, right? He didn't say, you know, go therefore and on the weekends make disciples of all people. He said, you know, go make disciples. So we would say whether you do that in a church, a school, a nonprofit, or in, you know, a bank, our calling in Christ doesn't change. So just we have to figure out what that means. I know for me, when I realized that dualism had crept into my life and I wanted to get rid of it, I had to ask God, what does it even look like? I didn't have paradigms for it. And I think a lot of the men and women we serve are going, okay, I know I love Jesus and I know he has a call in my life and I know I've got this business. I don't even know what it looks like to bring those two together.
And you've done such a good job. And I might just mention this was actually formed by Buck Jacobs back in Tampa, Florida. And again, this has grown into an enormous organization. So talk about that, because you have businesses where you might have 5 employees or 5,000 employees. You might have a business that has annual revenues of $1 million or maybe even $1 billion. So talk about what that entails and what was his vision initially when he actually put that together.
Yeah, so Buck Jacobs came to Christ in his late 30s and was running a business, and he founded C12 out of the idea of, could you merge best practice business learning and peer roundtables with biblical study and a real compulsion to actually follow Jesus in life, and could those two be brought together? And then we wanted to see business as a ministry, not just a place to do good and give money away, but to actually impact the world for Christ. And to do that, you want businesses that have got scale. So we target people that are $1 million and above, 5 employees or more, and it's really the gamut. I mean, even here in Dallas, where we're filming today, there's a company here with $4.5 billion, and there's a company with $1 million, all in the same group together. So we're pretty agnostic when it comes to size of business, as long as you meet minimum thresholds. The real question is, how do we grow businesses that honor God And then how do we have businesses that change the world? That's really our mission statement, to change the world by seeing the kingdom of God advance in the marketplace.
One of the things we're doing is having a link to C12Group.com, and we'll have all sorts of links there and places where you can find out about the conference and a variety of others. But there are a lot of misconceptions people might have because, as I said, it's not just a round table. It's not just a business Bible study. I know you probably have struggled with trying to explain what this is. And let me see if I can put you on the spot to see if you can kind of help our listeners understand exactly what this might mean and whether or not there are even some listeners in the listening audience that might want to actually participate in something like this.
I was on the plane this morning, and the person next to me was saying, well, what is it? Yeah. And I was going, well, it's a lot of things. So it's an accountability group. It's a business learning group. We're all about learning best practices and growing. It's also a place where you get challenged to follow Jesus in your life and your family. It's a ministry equipping zone. You get taught skills to do ministry in your business.
Right.
But it's also a board of advisors. It's also a place you go to say, help me steward this company because it's really God's anyway. And all those things get merged into one. It's got executive coaching built in. It's got training built in. But it's one of those things where if you separate any of those pieces out, you go, yeah, I know what those are. But when you put them together, it really is an unusual experience that until you've been to it, you don't really get it. We always tell people, until you've been to a C12 group, you don't even know what it is. Yeah. You really can't.
And I've been to some of the events to try to explain it, and I always feel sorry for anybody that's in front of me there trying to explain it, because as you get with it for a while, you sort of get a handle on it. Yeah. But you enjoy strategic planning and BHAGs, as you would talk about here, these big, hairy, audacious goals and things of that nature. And so, again, that's part of that. But you're really putting together people at that level of leadership who are committed believers, letting iron sharpen iron. Isn't that really what's going on there?
It is. It's putting you in a forum. I was talking to a CEO from Houston yesterday, and he said, Mike, it's hard enough being a CEO.
Oh, yeah.
Then it's hard enough being a Christian. When you try to put the two together, you really feel alone. Like, who else is even doing this?
Yes.
And when he first walked into a C12 group, he's like, finally, okay, here's other people wrestling with the same things I am. And we can be okay not being okay, figuring it out together. Yeah. And then there's a structure to help us actually go somewhere with it.
And I was thinking that synergism might help, because sometimes the best ideas come outside of your discipline. If all you are interacting with everybody in manufacturing, or all you are dealing with people in a sales force, some of the other ideas that come by the cross-pollinization or the synergism might actually answer the question in your business, and you're not going to find it just simply talking to other people doing the same business that you're doing.
Well, so I found C12 originally as a member. I joined in 2010. I was executive pastor of a church, and I was running a company. And I've had the privilege, now that I'm CEO of the parent company, I actually joined a C12 group as a member. So I'm a dues-paying member of a local C12 group, and I go to the meetings, I have a coach. And there's a member in my group who runs a fitness business, coaches all over the country doing, boot camps and stuff like that. Wildly different businesses. But this guy and his wife are able to speak into my life because their business, while totally different, has some same issues I'm facing. Yeah. And that is a benefit of the cross-pollination of different disciplines.
If you go to your website, one of the things you talk about is a trusted authority, that you become a trusted authority on really business best practices. So talk about that for just a minute, because in some respects, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are some practices that we can learn from books, practices we can learn from personal experience that can be shared in some of these roundtables, can't they?
Yes, so we've got a couple hundred groups meeting around the country in about 95 cities. And whether you go to a group in Philadelphia or San Diego, it's the same meeting each month because we've got curriculum that drives it. So there are a host of best practices in business that we can present in a case study format that applies to any business, whether you're a landscape company or a cybersecurity company. And many people find yourself running a business, and you were a technician, you were a plumber, a doctor, a software developer, and then now you're not doing any of that. You're running a company.
Right.
And you think you're alone and you're special, but you're really not. You realize that these are tried and true issues, and there's truths out there that we can all learn from. And uniquely, what we want to do is go, what's best practice? How would God have us do those best practices? Like, what would be distinctive of a follower of Jesus in the marketplace dealing with those issues? And that's hard.
Mike Sharrow with us, C12 Group. We'll have more right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, Cal Thomas begins his column by recounting his visit to Singapore a few years ago. He asked the cab driver about the unemployment rate. He was shocked to hear that it was fewer than 2%. What was the reason for such a low rate? Well, the cab driver said, "We don't have any welfare here. If you are able-bodied and don't work, the government doesn't send you a check." The Apostle Paul writes in 2 Thessalonians 3:10 that if anyone would not work, neither should he eat. He recognized what the leaders in Singapore discovered. We need to be motivated to work. Regularly giving someone a handout can be a great demotivator. Handouts rob people of their dignity and ultimately devalue their work ethic. Welfare programs have been around for decades, but they seem to be increasing in number and expense. There are at least 126 different programs at an annual cost of $1 trillion per year. Certainly, many of the recipients have a financial need, but we need to evaluate whether a whole generation living on welfare is good for the families and good for the nation. Few Americans would deny the value of giving someone a hand up by providing temporary assistance so that they can get back on their feet. But providing decades of handouts creates dependency and corrodes the human spirit. Humans were made to work and express their energy and creativity in their work. Laziness and idleness are usually the byproduct of many welfare programs. We've also made welfare very attractive. In previous commentaries, I described studies that concluded that welfare pays more than a minimum wage job in 35 states. In more than a dozen states, welfare pays more than $15 per hour. People on welfare may not be lazy, but they aren't stupid. Why work when welfare pays so well? Perhaps that is why the unemployment rate in Singapore is lower than in the United States. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And once again, we had an interview that we did a while back with Mike Sharrow, who's the president and CEO of the C12 Group. But also, one of the things I wanted to do is answer your questions. We already got some calls coming in, so if you're online, just hold on. Or if you'd like to ask a question, 1-800-351-1212. Tom O'Dwyer is with us. We'll get to him in just a minute. But one of the other things in the interview that I did with Mike Sharrow was to talk about some of the benefits that come to the C12 members to actually begin to improve their businesses, and wanted to find out what he found in that regard.
Our number one core value of our organization is results matter. So we always tell our members we're a for-profit business serving for-profit businesses. And so if we don't help you get better value, you shouldn't keep paying dues, you shouldn't come to meetings. And so we've engaged in numerous longitudinal studies, one being a 10-year span from the late 90s to the mid-2000s, and then again from 2008 to 2013, during times where there was the dot-com bubble, where there's recessions, some pretty tumultuous times. And in both those periods of time, C12 members not only survived it, which is good for a lot of people, but 80% of them outperformed their peers, many times being 3 times as profitable as their peers. And a lot of that comes down to when you're in a group that's making you every month look at your business, and you have outside perspective and accountability, and from a eternal perspective, you're playing the long-term view of business. You end up being more durative. Your business gets leaner. Your processes get better, and you do outperform. And one of our hopes is that the Matthew 5:16 passage, we'd run businesses that are doing so much good in the community, so much good around the world, that people would look at those good works and they'd glorify the Father, right? They'd go, right, what's the secret?
Yes.
And a lot of the guys and gals who join a group often join it wanting to get help with a business issue, and then they're wanting to honor God, and they're almost surprised a year later, 2 years later, to look back and go, wow, how is my business this much better? Because again, it's not a silver bullet thing. It's just step by step by step, improving every part of a business.
But again, it's accountability, it's interaction, it's the iron sharpening iron, it's carrying one another's, bearing one another's burdens, all the biblical principles there, certainly very key. And another one that I saw is C12 members view their business as a ministry. You mentioned that just a minute ago, but for some people that go, no, business is business, ministry is ministry. How do you put those two together? That was a question you were asking back in 2005, I guess, when you talked about this duality. How does that fit?
Yeah, that's one of the most disruptive ideas. Is I think most people in business are used to the idea of giving money through their business, and most are pretty generous at that. But it's a different deal when you begin to systematically create a strategic plan where you look at ministry in your company the same way you look at sales or operations or finance, and you're looking at the employees and their families, the vendors, the customers, the processes, your industry, your community, and you're going, how are we making Christ known, and where are opportunities to disciple people, to explain the gospel in a compelling way, to demonstrate the love of Jesus in a community. This looks like a lot of different things. We have companies that have chaplains come to their companies.
Right.
We have folks doing, typical things you may think of, Bible studies and prayer groups. Other ones where they're doing biblical conflict training, mission trips, all kinds of stuff. What's beautiful is the average C12 company sees 3 to 4 times the rate of salvations, discipleship, and missions that a typical U.S. church will see. But if you think about it, it's not surprising because you've got 70% unchurched people working for you, and they're there 40, 50 hours a week. And you get a chance to do life-on-life ministry in a more organic, ongoing nature. And it really does become, your business becomes a for-profit ministry venture.
Yeah. And talk about that for just a minute, too, because there is a situation where some of our listeners might think, well, my company's not really a Christian company. I mean, there are some companies that from start to finish, from top to bottom, they're pretty much Christian companies, even though they have some non-Christians working there. But in some cases, it may be just the CEO that's a Christian, right?
Yep. No, I'm a member of a C12 group, and there's a guy in my group who's he's a minority partner in a technology firm. He's a hired gun CEO. A private equity group owns it, really. His partners are not believers. And so he goes, hey, I can't just go back and say, hey, guys, we're having Bible study today at the staff meeting. He doesn't quite have the latitude. But our group challenges him and go, well, how do you do ministry there? And the reality is they actually brought in chaplains, even though it's not a Christian company, because there's a good employee benefit. He's found ways to disciple people in the company and to raise up groups, and there's ministry happening in that company. And so part of what we try to avoid is there's not a cookie cutter. We're not here to sell, here's the C12 way. It's, well, Jesus has got you in a business. He's got you there for a purpose beyond just making money. And let's figure out what that is. And so you're right, it is different for different types. You get the publicly traded NASDAQ companies versus the mom and pop law firm. But business is a ministry regardless of the business type and regardless of your latitude and comfort.
Sure. C12 members also strengthen marriage and family relationships. Mike, that's one of the big issues because you get so involved in business, it is real easy to neglect your family. I know you probably don't, but I know a lot of leaders do. So you spend some time not just talking about how the business is going, but where you are in terms of your family relationships too, don't you?
Yeah. When you ask the question, what does it mean to be successful? A lot of people are in business and they're looking to be successful.
Yeah.
And we go, well, that's a fine question, but how does God define success? And is God satisfied if you 10x your company, but you lose your marriage or you lose your kids or you neglect your soul in the process?
Good point.
And so a regular part of our process would be looking at how do I balance being a CEO, being a mom or dad, a husband or wife, and how do I see flourishing happen in all those areas? And so through regular assessments, regular accountability, best practice sharing, and then even going, that's part of the reason why you've got to build a healthy business, is a healthy business should give you the time to be a parent and be a spouse and be an active member of your local church and do all those things. But I know in my group, we even interview spouses on an annual basis to say, tell us the truth about Mike. How is Mike doing as a husband?
Oh, that's good.
What's going on there? How can we help him with that? We believe in a total life success is God who defines success. And that changes everything. 92% of our members would say it has strengthened and changed their marriage, and we routinely see marriages being reconciled and healed. And then that unleashes another ministry in the company. Right? So if your marriage has been transformed, you go back and start thinking about marriages of your employees differently. And you and I would be like-minded in that marriage is one of those battlefronts in our society.
Sure is, yeah.
That really the workplace is one of the few places that people with broken marriages still show up.
Yeah.
Right? You may pull out of your local church. You may avoid certain scenes, but you're probably still going to work.
Yeah, you're probably still going to work, and that's a place where ministry can really take place. Let's, for just a minute, talk about what's available on the website for listeners that want to know more. Obviously, they may not necessarily work in a business, but they may know someone that would be a perfect candidate for C12Group.com. Talk about what's available there, because you have conferences, you have all sorts of opportunities for people to join one of those groups in that local community. We broadcast in 42 different states, so there's probably one in each one of the states where we're actually broadcasting today. So talk about what they'll find when they go to the website and what the next step might be.
Yeah, I would encourage you, go to the website, regardless of what your role in a company is. We've got something there called the Resource Hub. There's free ebooks and articles and resources to really help any Christian in business think about their business in a more effective way, and there's tools they can enjoy there. You can find where we're at. I think we're only in 38 states. You got us beat there. We're growing. We're going to catch up with you. You can find groups. You can find events and conferences. You can also see case studies and testimonies of members and what's happening. And I would also encourage, it's the kind of resource you want to take to the family member or to your boss or to a peer and say, hey, have you looked at this? Have you thought about it this way? 90% of the times when we're talking to a CEO or a business owner, they just haven't even thought about it, and they didn't know it existed. Most of our members don't come to us say, hey, I've been looking for this for a long time. They show up saying, I didn't even know this was out there.
Yeah, didn't know it was there. And you've been a pastor, and let's speak to the pastors for just a minute. I know we have a lot of pastors that listen to this program. I have some seminary students that do. We have a number of people that have called in over the years that are either Bible study fellowship leaders or small group leaders or things like that. What I want them to do is think about going to this website and thinking about someone in their sphere of influence, in their church, in their small group, that they say, they probably don't know about this, and I need to take this to them since they probably didn't hear the broadcast today.
There's a church in Austin, Texas that said, their elder board said, Mike, I view C12 as like our auxiliary discipleship team that helps disciple a small niche of our church that we can never adequately disciple ourselves, because it's hard to speak CEO speak, and to help that guy or gal scale their business, create the margin they need to be involved in the church, and to be able to give more generously and serve better, and to integrate their faith in their life. What I find is that we will commonly find guys who are elders and deacons in their churches who are wonderful doctrinal stewards on Sunday, but Monday through Friday it's eating their lunch.
Yeah.
And what a C12 group can do is help right-size that, integrate their life more, and free them up. I've got pastors who will call me saying, hey, I've got this guy. You got to get Joe in a group. I know he loves God, but man, his life is a mess.
Oh, boy.
And I think if you guys could connect the dots at his workplace, that's where it could really turn the lights on for him. And so churches and elders and ministries should see us as really an ally who can create some of the highest potential, highest impact scenarios of businesses and people who are really advancing the gospel in a city, and come alongside those churches and help them with those individuals.
Well, again, Mike Sharrow with us, and Karen, we taped that interview, but we now have in studio with us Tom O'Dwyer. So if you'd like to ask some questions, make some comments, 1-800-351-1212. We'll take your calls right after this.
There are those who listen to Point of View while they're driving, and some can listen at home or at work. But here's the question. Where do you go where you cannot listen to Point of View? Well, if you have the app, the free Point of View radio app, the answer is just about nowhere. This is an on-the-go world, and now wherever you go, Point of View goes with you. Visit the Apple or Google Play Store and download the free Point of View app. You can listen and watch the program live or play it again later. Get Kerby's Viewpoints commentary. Click the Take Action link. Learn about important issues and make a difference in this world. You can also read articles, find a local radio station, easily contact us with your comments or questions. Don't leave home or the office or anywhere else without Point of View. Again, visit the Apple or Google Play Store today and get the app, the free Point of View radio app. Oh, and one more thing, if you like it, click that little button that says Donate Now and join the team. Point of View and the Point of View app, with you on the go.
Point of View will continue after this. listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour. If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Played the interview that I taped earlier with Mike Sharrow, who again is the president and CEO of the C12 Group. But I knew that some of you might have some questions or like to know a little bit more. So I've brought in a good friend. We've known him for many years, Tom O'Dwyer, who is one of the managing chairs of the C12 Group here in the Dallas area. Individual that has worked in commercial real estate for, I think, 29 years, but really has an incredible passion to disciple and mentor business leaders, and has been part of the C12 Group. And Tom, it is just great to have you in studio with us today.
Glad to be here, Kerby.
And you know Mike Sharrow. I mean, there is an individual that has been an executive pastor, and he's been with some of these Fortune 500 companies, and he has been just very gifted. And so I really am excited about the C12 Group, especially under his leadership.
Well, I agree. Michael has been the president of C12 now for a little bit more than a year. Mm-hmm. And an extraordinarily gifted man. We're blessed to have him as our leader, yes. And just grateful for his involvement in today's program.
One of the things that he talked about early, and I know you are concerned about this as well, is this sacred secular idea. I think we illustrated this with the taped interview, but now on this live opportunity, I wanted to get your thoughts, because we have a lot of people that, let's just talk about men for a minute, but this also applies to women, but especially that go to church. They certainly try to apply their biblical principles in their church life and their family life, but then they go off to the business world. And what's going on in the boardroom is really different, and sometimes they don't feel any connection between what they learn in church and what is happening in their business. And that's what you're trying to bridge that gap, aren't you?
That's exactly right. I think it's a function of being raised in an environment, even within our Christian community, whereby we have become comfortable. It's become familiar to us to be able to function in one capacity Monday through Friday, and then differently on the weekend with our families. I know for myself, growing up in the business community as a young businessman, we had our children in Wednesday night church program. We were there every Sunday. We were involved in youth ministry. But then come Monday morning, that hat went away. The ministry hat was taken off. The business cap was put on. And you begin to function and operate like most of your business peers do. Yes. It's a competitive world out there. And there's your sense that you need to roll your sleeves up and get after it. And so you do that for 5 days, really with little regard for whether or not you're having an impact for Christ in your office.
Yes, and one of the things we talk about so often is really a desire for people to be able to articulate a biblical worldview and defend a biblical worldview and apply their biblical ideas and values over every area of life. But that part that seems to get left out so often is the business world. And it isn't because people are intentionally trying to do it, but as I talk with Mike, and I'd like to get your comments as well, it's that some people just say, I don't know how to do this. I am in a business. I have been mentored by people that don't have a biblical worldview. There may be some of my partners that aren't thinking biblically about these issues, and I'd like to really make a difference, but I really don't even know how to do so.
That's exactly the point. Two things. One is none of us don't know what we don't know.
Yes.
And so I think that, again, if you look back at the environment within which we've been raised, even to enter into the professional world, we haven't really been encouraged and educated and informed about how to bring and transition and integrate biblical principles into the workplace. It's more than moral, having good moral principles. Mm-hmm. It's really principles that are biblically based, and that we are compelled to live out those principles because we realize that there's an eternal impact at risk. So I think that's true. People haven't been raised to have that understanding. And then number two, for those that do kind of get it, they truly don't know how to go about it. And there's a lot of fear involved. Yeah. They aren't sure what the repercussions might be politically, legally, and otherwise if they were to be more active in their business.
Yeah, as we talk about that just a minute, that even Mike shared an example of an individual has partners, and he's the only Christian, so he's wondering, okay, if I even begin to do this, that is going to be maybe something that is going to rattle some cages. There was, it would be easier if you're with a group that's known as kind of a Christian business. You know, Chick-fil-A fits into that category. Interstate Batteries fits into that category. Hobby Lobby. But What about groups where you aren't necessarily surrounded by a lot of Christians, but you still want to live out your Christian life as a CEO?
Well, that's a good question. I've got a client, for example, Kerby, a $15 million business owner who has two partners, and neither of his two partners are Christians. Mm-hmm. He happens to be the more influential partner of the three, and when he discovered C12, decided to join, initially had some concerns about how his partners might respond. He visited with them and explained that, in the very least, C12 offered an environment for business practitioners to sharpen one another around the table from their own personal business experiences. And so at that point, minimally, they were comfortable with him being involved. But as it went on, and as he began to take pieces of our curriculum back into the workplace and visit with his key leaders around these business principles and curricula, he found that his partners saw the impact, that business operations were beginning to improve, that culture was beginning to change, the level of communication, the alignment that was occurring within the business was improving. And so they became impressed. And at some point, he gave them an opportunity to pull out, or he acknowledged that he would be willing to pull out if that was something they wanted to do, and they were his biggest champions. I'm not sure that they've given their life to Christ at this point, but they fully are supportive of the C12 process that's being engaged in this business.
You mentioned that just in passing, but Mike talked about that too, that one of the more evangelistic outreaches in America today are things through the C12 groups, because, again, you are actually spending 40 hours a week, 80 hours a week for some of these people that are working all the time, and you're doing life together. And so there are great opportunities, not that that's the goal, but it certainly is one of the byproducts, if you will, of the C12 group, isn't it?
It is. One of the things we take a hard look at with our businesses is helping them to develop a strategic plan for ministry. At C12, we have a tagline that says that priorities are what we do, everything else is just talk. So we focus, as Mike was talking about earlier, on all kinds of best practices in business.
Sure.
We measure. Performance is important. C12 and being excellent in business is never about anything less than being excellent in measuring your results. At the same time, as Mike mentioned, having an impactful ministry is another element that usually is left out. So early on, we try to help companies move into a better understanding of what their mission might be within their organization, and then to develop a strategic plan for ministry impact, just like they would in any other area of their business. And as Mike again alluded to, if, for example, the average size church in the world is 100 people, then clearly most of the businesses that we're aware of, and those that are involved in C12, have impact that far outstretches the impact of most of the churches, not only around the world, but around this country. When you think about your employees and their families, your customers, their families, your service providers, your partners, your strategic alliances, and the impact ultimately that you can have in other people's lives, it is amazing how large that ministry number might look like.
Yes. You know, one of the things in your mission is this idea of advancing the kingdom of God in the marketplace. And again, we sometimes are really good about sending missionaries around the world, but the marketplace is, as you said, just huge. And so that's one of the mission statements, if I remember right, of C12, isn't it?
It is, for sure. We believe, certainly as C12 managing chairs, as myself, we believe that we are clearly called. The perspective is different than just having a career. I didn't come to C12 for a career. I came to C12 because God made it clear that C12 was where he wanted me. We try to help business owners move into a reality that that's true for them. If Jeremiah 29:11 is true, where it says in part that God knows the plans he has for us, plans for our welfare and not calamity, and if it's also true in the New Testament in Ephesians 2:10, where it says that we are his workmanship, made in Christ Jesus for good works, which he prepared in advance for us to walk in, then there's every reason to believe that every believer is being called to be a disciple. And every platform that God gives a believer, career platform, becomes the place where Christ is calling that individual to live out that Christian life and live it out in a way that it reveals the light of Christ in the world around them. So we feel that every business owner is a chief steward, chief disciple, and it's that business owner and that business that has the great opportunity to evangelize, not only for the purpose of maturing those that already believe, but really being evangelistic to the world that doesn't know Christ.
Tom O'Dwyer in studio with us, and let's give you a chance if you would like to ask a question or make a comment. 1-800-351-1212. We also played earlier the taped interview I did with Mike Sharrow, and this is the C12 Group. And if you'd like to know a little bit more, you can go to the website. You will see both of their pictures, and as you click on the links, it will take you to C12Group.com. You may not own a company that could qualify, but I guarantee you in your church you know some that would, and if you could pass this on to them, this would be great. I also want to talk about how churches can use this. We'll come back and talk about that, take some phone calls right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Evelyn Shatkin, Linda Shiflett, and Doug Maples took prayer seriously. So seriously, in fact, that they decided to meet together after work and pray for a colleague that had been causing them problems. They met at the cubicle of their colleague after work on a day that she was not even in the office. Their prayer got pretty serious. They anointed the cubicle with oil, according to Shatkin's religious tradition. They prayed for peace and joy for their colleague. They even commanded demons to leave their colleague as they prayed. Word got back to the supervisors about the after-hours prayer meeting, and after an investigation, the supervisor concluded that, quote, the nature, the manner that they're praying, what language they're using, determines whether the prayer was harassment. Human Resources agreed and notified the prayer givers that they would be terminated for their harassing prayers. Shatkin and Shiflett asked for a religious accommodation for the prayers, but that was denied. They were fired. First Liberty Institute took up their case. A federal district court sided with the employees as it concluded, quote, can a prayer for someone constitute harassment when the alleged object of the prayer is unaware of it? This court suspects not, unquote. In fact, the court concluded that the college's own policies protected the prayers of these employees. Firing someone for their peaceful exercise of religion at work doesn't have a prayer. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
If you'd like to ask some questions, 1-800-351-1212. Tom O'Dwyer in studio with us for a few more minutes. C12 Group. And just before we take some of the calls, and even, I'll, matter of fact, mention one because somebody had to drop off here, a question that he had. I might mention that as you go to C12Group.com, even if you're not a member of C12, you actually have what many people call the nation's largest network of Christian CEOs and business owners. And so this is August. This is September 28th to the 30th. So this gives you more than a month's notice to book a plane flight and to make your way to the C12 Marketplace Leader Conference, and this year, San Antonio. And so you can find out a little bit more about that by going to the website c12group.com. So even if you say, well, okay, I don't own a business that has $1 million or that has those kind of people, but I'd like to learn some of these business techniques. Or maybe you say, maybe I don't own a business, but I'd like to pass this on to someone else, or I'd like to be one of the individuals that could receive some training. This is available to you. So again, one of the things, Tom, we would encourage people to do is go to that website, and you'll find all sorts of great information, won't you?
Yes, absolutely. And if you are, no matter where you are around the country, if you were to go to the website, you'll have an opportunity to identify a C12 group practice that is operating nearby. And so I would encourage you to do that as well to learn more about what C12 has to offer.
One of the callers had to drop off, Michael, but he wanted to know what you might be able to do in helping a new business or a startup business. How would that be helpful?
A startup business in annual revenue and a number of employees may not meet the threshold for C12 environment. Mm-hmm. However, what we have found over time is that if we have a serial entrepreneur who is starting a new business and with intentions of growing this business beyond $1 million in revenue and beyond a level of 5 employees, we would strongly encourage that person to take a look at C12.
Yes.
Where better to be at a critical time to receive counsel and wise business advice than around a table with other business owners. So to that person, I would say, give us a call and let's see if that isn't something we can work out.
Yes. And again, you're in the Dallas area, but of course these are all over the country, and we wanted to bring you in to answer those questions. Before I take one of these other calls, what about churches? It seems to me that we do, as I mentioned with Mike in the taped interview, we have pastors, we have Sunday school leaders, we have small group leaders. There are things that churches can consider, but even so, I would really challenge pastors to think right now, if they're listening, is there somebody in my church that really would benefit from this kind of discipleship? Because that's really what you're doing in this business area in ways that a pastor who's gone through seminary could probably not provide the kind of counsel that you can. That's a great point, Kirby. Most pastors haven't been raised up professionally in the business environment. Some have, and certainly some more than others. Mm-hmm. But C12 is unique in that, again, it's not a Bible study per se, although we spend time in every one of our monthly meetings doing devotional work around Scripture. And the theme of that devotion is what runs like a thread through the rest of our curriculum in every month's meeting. However, since we are targeting business owners, the curriculum that's been developed is really written for business leaders. And so if you're not a leader, an owner, the primary operator and influencer of a business, then you won't be able to benefit from the curriculum that we're providing. So we intentionally bring not just business leaders and not just business people together, but very specifically the CEOs and the chief influencers. Church continues to do such a great job of providing programs to equip individuals with biblical principles. Mm-hmm. We'd like to be able to let them take that a step beyond. We can be a good augment to what it is they're trying to do by taking someone that's been rooted and introduced to biblical principles and then take them a step further so they can begin to integrate those principles, begin to manifest the fruit of the Spirit in their daily lives as they're making business decisions and interacting with people around their businesses. Let's take some more phone calls. We'll go to Juan in Brownsville, Texas. Juan, thank you for calling today.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate your program. We can hear it all the way to Brownsville.
Isn't that amazing?
Brownsville is the bottom of the nation, the city that is in the bottom of the nation, and it's being proven that this is the poorest city of the whole nation. So you know what that means? That means that this is where God lives. Because God became poor. He was rich and he became poor. So this is what God lives. And I tell you what, I am very excited about what the preacher is saying, or what the director is saying, or the speaker is saying, that we need to bring this message to the workplace, to the businesses. And, you know, a couple of months an attorney from attorney firm called me, and he said, "Pastor, I'm calling you because I want you to work for me." And I go, "But I'm a pastor. I'm not an attorney." And he said, "Well, I want you to pray for my clients. My clients come here with all kinds of problems, divorce, separation, finances, you name it. And they come here and they need to hear the kingdom of God." So right now I work for this firm.
How about
and
that?
I thank God. We need to go to the businesses. We need to go to the attorneys, firms, all of them. We need to go out there in the marketplace, full with the Holy Spirit, because, I believe that we are living in the end times. This is the end times. We're living in a time, the generation of apostasy. And we need to go and spread this gospel and let them know that there is hope. There's hope in all the areas of their lives. And I really appreciate your program.
Thank you. Let me just give Tom, we're almost out of time, but I want to give you a chance to react, because there's a pastor saying, we just need to get into the business world. And pastors sometimes are equipped for the business world, but most of the time are not. And that's where they can rely on people like you.
Well, the pastors can't be everywhere all the time much as they try to, and God bless them. We really can become an extension of what it is they feel like their mission is, and that is to, in a more targeted and specific way, continue the equipping process from a biblical perspective with best practices in business. So I'm really encouraged to hear this pastor in the way that he's been called into the marketplace. I'm reminded that Billy Graham said the next great movement of God through the gospel would occur in the marketplace. Jesus spent his time in the marketplace. And so we really believe that the best way to impact today those that are in the marketplace professionally but may not be churched or may be unchurched is through business.
Yes.
And through men and women who God's called to lead those businesses for him so that he might have an impact for the kingdom.
Well, I remember when Joe Galindo, I think it was about 10 years ago, told me about this. And then, of course, I went to one of your events. And a good friend of mine, John Rogers, had also suggested I connect up with Mike Sharrow. But I would have to say that I doubt less than 1 in 100 of our listeners knew anything about C12 Group. So we've tried to change that today, haven't we?
We sure have. Thank you for inviting us into this program today.
We'd love to do something like this again, but let's encourage you now to take some action. We encourage action items, and one of those is for you to go to the C12group.com. We have a link there. And even if you do not have a business where you would qualify, think of somebody in your area of influence that you would want to share that with. And there's a share button so that you can send it on to them. And again, they could also listen to this. You can go to the podcast and do that. Of course, you can also spend some time if you want to do that. And what is, again, you got C12DFW.com. So that's another place where you can go. And I would encourage you to take the information you've heard today and either go to our podcast or even to our YouTube channel and pass that on to some other individuals. If you'd like to contact, of course, Tom O'Dwyer, C12DFW.com is a good place to do so. Of course, we have all the links to him and to Mike Sharrow on the website. So, Tom, thanks for being with us today here on Point of View.
Thank you for including me. It's a
pleasure. I want to thank everybody that's been a part of this program. I want to thank Andrew and Tina and Steve, as well as Shamila, for their help. Stay with us tomorrow on our weekend edition. We'll see you then.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the Republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed.